Greetings, Remnant Church and online friends. Welcome to the Midweek Refuel, where we seek out the ancient wisdoms simply because modern wisdom has sinned. And folks, it has sinned spectacularly. I mean, if modern wisdom were compared to a kid in Sunday school class, it'd be the kid who's eating the crayons, setting the hymnals on fire, and then complaining to the teacher that the fire is judgmental. Tonight, we're going to be reading G.K. Chesterton, the jolly prophet of paradox, in Chapter 3 of Orthodoxy, The Suicide of Thought. It's aptly named. And Chesterton literally nails what's wrong with the world. And believe it or not, it's not that it's too wicked, but that it's too good in all the wrong ways. Now, the Bible has a word for this, and the Bible calls it sin. And sin literally means missing the mark. Think of an archer aiming at a bullseye or a target. And if you shoot too far left, well, you've missed. If you shoot too far right, you've missed. You may be close, but you missed. You can miss by being too evil. Of course you can. Stealing, lying, cheating, murdering. But you can also miss by being too good in the wrong direction. Truth without love, compassion without honesty, freedom without any kind of responsibility. And this isn't just theory. Look around you. Empathy untethered, compassion without truth. We end up affirming falsehoods and lies about identity, biology, and nature, and we do it in the name of something called kindness, some word that we've redefined again. Authenticity over everything. Well, it sounds noble, doesn't it? But it often excuses sin under the banner of, oh, they're just being real. Justice without mercy now. Cancel culture. Every wrong becomes a death sentence with no room for repentance, no room for mercy. Freedom without responsibility. Everyone wants liberty, don't they? But everybody wants liberty, but they don't want any limits. And to be honest with you, that's not liberty. That's chaos. Science without wisdom. Technology treats people like machines while ignoring the soul entirely. Reason without faith. Well, that's hyper-rational skepticism that saws off the very branch that it sits on. And here's the psychology behind it all. The evil person doesn't care. They don't give a hoot. Their conscience is seared. Their compass to the truth and morality is broken, and they'll trample anyone that gets in their way. That is sin by defiance. But there's another kind, the too good person. And the too good person doesn't feel conviction either. Oh no, because they honestly believe that they're the heroes of the story. They'll good us all to death and feel good about it. That's sin by distortion. And we've seen this in our lifetime. Either way, the arrow misses God's target. One refuses the target altogether, and the other shifts the target to suit themselves and their opinions and their sentimentalities. And that's exactly what Chesterton means when he says that the modern world isn't short on virtues, we are drowning in them. The problem is they've escaped the zoo. They're wandering the streets now, biting people. And speaking of that zoo, Chesterton takes us a step further, as he always does. He says humility itself has wandered into the wrong cage. Once upon a time, humility meant doubting yourself so that you could stand firmly on the truth. Now humility has been misplaced, hasn't it? We doubt truth itself, but we're absolutely certain about our own opinions. You see the stupidity of that statement, don't you? That's like saying, I'm humble enough to question whether the sun exists, but I'll fight you to the death over my sunglasses. And here's the punchline. You actually need humility in order to enjoy even pride. Think about it. To be proud of hitting the target, you first have to admit that there is indeed a target. But if you're so humble that you deny that the target exists, well, then what's left to boast about? That's when pride itself collapses into despair. Pride cometh before a fall. It's the same thing that Jesus taught in his parable about taking the main seat at a banquet table. He said, don't grab the best seat for yourself because you might be told to move down in front of everyone. Instead, take the lowest seat. And the host may say, friend, move up higher. And then Jesus drives it home. Everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Chesterton and Jesus are pointing at the same truth. Pride without humility is brittle, it's embarrassing, and it's empty. Humility without conviction is madness. But humility before God, that's the seat that gets honored. And if you want a modern picture of this gone wrong, just look at the faces in the photos from a pride parade. On the surface, they're all smiles and glitter, aren't they? But I invite you to study the faces carefully, and you'll see the paradox I'm speaking of. Ecstasy on the outside, insecurity in the eyes, exhaustion around the edges. It's people trying to enjoy pride without an ounce of humility, and it doesn't work. Because when you deny the target, you can march all day long, but you'll never hit the bullseye. Before we dive into the source material today, let me just say this. If you're finding these midweek refuels helpful, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe buttons. Now listen, this isn't just so the algorithm is nice to me, even though it does do that. This is training, and training in the Logos, training in truth, and training in truth makes you a danger to the darkness. The more you learn to think clearly, laugh rightly, and stand humbly before your God's truth, the harder it is for the lies of the age to get their claws into your mind. That's why we keep coming back week after week to sharpen our minds and to anchor our hearts in the wisdom that does not collapse. And this isn't just my idea. This is Bible 101. Romans 12:2 tells us, do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good, and what is acceptable, and what is perfect. Ephesians 4 says to put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. And of course, Colossians 3 reminds us that we have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator. In other words, the mind that trains in the Word of God becomes the mind that the world can no longer manipulate. That's why training in the Logos is not optional, it is essential for the Christian. It's the difference between being swept away with the mob and the crowd and standing firm in the truth on the foundation of Jesus Christ. And tonight, we're not just training with just anybody. We're opening the words of the laughing prophet himself, the Prince of Paradox, G.K. Chesterton. Chapter 3, The Suicide of Thought. The phrases of the street are not only forcible, but subtle. For a figure of speech can often get into a crack too small for a definition. Phrases like put out or off color might have been coined by Mr. Henry James in an agony of verbal precision. And there is no more subtle truth than that of the everyday phrase about a man having his heart in the right place. It involves the idea of normal proportion. Not only does a certain function exist, but it is rightly related to the other functions. Indeed, the negation of this phrase would describe with peculiar accuracy the somewhat morbid mercy and perverse tenderness of the most representative moderns. If, for instance, I had to describe with fairness the character of Mr. Bernard Shaw, I could not express myself more exactly than by saying that he has a heroically large and generous heart, but not a heart in the right place. And this is so of the typical society of our time. The modern world is not evil. In some ways, the modern world is far too good. It is full of wild and wasted virtues. When a religious scheme is shattered, as Christianity was shattered at the Reformation, it is not merely the vices that are let loose. The vices are indeed let loose, and they wander and do damage. But the virtues are let loose also, and the virtues wander more wildly, and the virtues do more terrible damage. The modern world is full of the old Christian virtues gone mad. The virtues have gone mad because they have been isolated from each other and are wandering alone. Thus, some scientists care for truth, and their truth is pitiless. Thus, some humanitarians only care for pity, and their pity, I'm sorry to say, is often untruthful. For example, Mr. Blatchford attacks Christianity because he is mad on one Christian virtue, the merely mystical and almost irrational virtue of charity. He has a strange idea that he will make it easier to forgive sins by saying that there are no sins to forgive. Mr. Blatchford is not only an early Christian, he's the only early Christian who ought really to have been eaten by lions. For in his case, the pagan accusation is really true. His mercy would mean mere anarchy. He really is the enemy of the human race because he is so human. As the other extreme, we may take the acrid realist who has deliberately killed in himself all human pleasure in happy tales or in the healing of the heart. Torquemada tortured people physically for the sake of moral truth. Zola tortured people morally for the sake of physical truth. But in Torquemada's time, there was at least a system that could, to some extent, make righteousness and peace kiss each other. Now they do not even bow. But a much stronger case than these two of truth and pity can be found in the remarkable case of the dislocation of humility. It is only with one aspect of humility that we are here concerned. Humility was largely meant as a restraint upon the arrogance and infinity of the appetite of man. He was always outstripping his mercies with his own newly invented needs. His very power of enjoyment destroyed half his joys. By asking for pleasure, he lost the chief pleasure, for the chief pleasure is surprise. Hence it became evident that if a man would make his world large, he must be always making himself small. Even the haughty visions, the tall cities, and the toppling pinnacles are the creations of humility. Giants that tread down forests like grass are the creations of humility. Towers that vanish upwards above the loneliest stars are the creations of humility. For towers are not tall unless we look up at them, and giants are not giants unless they are larger than we. All this giantesque imagination, which is perhaps the mightiest of the pleasures of man, is at bottom entirely humble. It is impossible without humility to enjoy anything, even pride. But what we suffer from today is humility in the wrong place. Modesty has been moved from the organ of ambition. Modesty has settled upon the organ of conviction where it was never meant to be. A man was meant to be doubtful about himself, but undoubtful about the truth. This has been exactly reversed. Nowadays, the part of a man that a man does assert is exactly the part he ought not to assert: himself. The part he doubts is exactly the part he ought not to doubt: the divine reason. Huxley preached a humility content to learn from nature, But the new skeptic is so humble that he doubts if he can even learn. Thus, we should be wrong if we had said hastily that there is no humility typical of our time. The truth is that there is a real humility typical of our time, but it so happens that it is practically a more poisonous humility than the wildest prostrations of the ascetic. The old humility was a spur that prevented a man from stopping, not a nail in his boot that prevented him from going on. For the old humility made a man doubtful of his efforts, which might make him work harder. But the new humility makes a man doubtful about his aims, which will make him stop working altogether. At any street corner, we may meet a man who utters the frantic and blasphemous statement that he may be wrong. Every day one comes across somebody who says that of course his view may not be the right one, of course his view must be the right one, or it is not his view. We are on the road to producing a race of men too mentally modest to believe in the multiplication table. We are in danger of seeing philosophers who doubt the law of gravity as being a mere fancy of their own. Scoffers of old time were too proud to be convinced, but these are too humble to be convinced. The meek do inherit the earth, but the modern skeptics are too meek even to claim their inheritance. It is exactly this intellectual helplessness which is our second problem. The last chapter has been concerned only with a fact of observation, that what peril of morbidity there is for a man comes rather from his reason than his imagination. It was not meant to attack the authority of reason. Rather, it is the ultimate purpose to defend it, for it needs defense. The whole modern world is at war with reason, and the tower already reels. So, did you hear it or not? Chesterton saw it over 100 years ago. The virtues gone mad, humility out of place, and reason itself committing suicide. And now here we are. We are living in that parody. We did not heed his warning. We live in a world where compassion demands that you deny biology, where justice is measured by how many people you can cancel, and where reason is so humble now that it doubts whether 2 + 2 still equals 4. And if it weren't so tragic, it would be hilarious. So let's laugh, because if we don't, we'll cry. Imagine trying to run a society on today's logic, will you? You need a permit to go fishing, but your 12-year-old can pick their gender at school without you knowing. We slap warning labels on hot coffee, but hand hormone blockers to kids like candy. Pornography is protected as free speech, but preaching the Bible is treated as hate speech. Children can be taught explicit sexual techniques in school, but they can't be taught the 10 Commandments there. Hollywood sells us 50 Shades of Bondage as liberation while portraying covenant marriage itself as oppression. God help us. We tell boys they're toxic for being men, but cheer when those same boys put on a dress and beat up a woman. We're told consent is the only moral law, while the culture works overtime to numb, groom, and confuse kids so they can't consent to anything with any kind of clarity. And the same voices shouting, "Love wins," are the ones redefining love so far away from God that it doesn't even mean sacrifice anymore. It just means lust and addiction. This is the modern zoo in which we live. Virtues and vices all dressed in clown costumes running through the streets, biting everybody they come in contact with. But here's the great hope. The Logos itself does not collapse, and it never will. Christ doesn't reel like the tower of man's reason. His word still stands. His truth still hits the mark, and his invitation is still open to all. Humble yourself before him today, and he will lift you up. So let's laugh, friends. Let's laugh at the sheer insanity of the age we live in, not because we don't take it seriously, but because our God is still on his throne. Laughter is a kind of a victory song. It's the reminder that the darkness has not won, Modern wisdom may have sinned spectacularly, but the Logos still shines, and Christ is still King. Hail to the King.